Today I will be making a brief presentation about designing instructional materials that consider color blindness. When designing instructional materials, instructional designers need to take a number of things into consideration to make their materials appealing to the learner. This includes considering things like the typeface, the fonts, the graphics used, the color scheme, spacing, how information is presented, etc. Instructional designers are not only responsible for content, they're also responsible for appearance. For this first assignment, I decided to look specifically at color blindness, as it's a condition that affects about 4.5% of the overall population and about 8% of men. In preparing materials for my own classroom, I've not always taken into consideration that some students may not be able to perceive color in the same way that I do. Until recently, I taught word families by highlighting the rhyme of the word in a different color. Now, I still use a different color, but I also use an underline to emphasize that there is a difference. Research has shown that color itself is not going to promote learning, but it could have an impact on motivation and in having someone remember material. We have all become very discriminate with presentation since home computers can create slick presentations and graphics. Just to give you a little background, there are three main types of color blindness: deuteranopia, protanopia, and tritanopia. Deuteranopia and protanopia both deal with the green, yellow, red section of the color spectrum, while tritanopia deals with the blue, yellow section. Tritanopia is extremely rare, affecting approximately 3 out of every 1,000 people, while deuteranopia and protanopia affect between 1 and 5% of males, varying by race, and approximately 0.1% of females. The flags that you have seen give you a general idea of how people perceive these colors, but you can get a much clearer view by looking at authentic pictures. While you are designing, you can easily take a screenshot of a graphic or a slide that you're working on and run it through a simulator online to see if the color scheme will work for people with color blindness. Content is very important in creating instructional materials, but presentation also should play a role. Websites, presentations, and printed materials all need to be accessible. If accessibility via color schemes is not considered, some learners may not be able to understand the information correctly, or they may have great difficulty in following along. As designers, we need to be thinking about our learners' needs in terms of content during the process of design and development. Something as simple as monitoring color choice could make a world of difference for a learner with color blindness, and it really doesn't take a whole lot of effort on our part to ensure that design is accessible. As we go through this course and design instructional materials, I'm sure we'll find that we all have our personal preferences when it comes to color and style, but ultimately we can agree that it's important to make our final products clear and easy for everyone to read. There are numerous websites available that describe how to improve designs for colorblind individuals. Most of these websites deal specifically with creating websites or sales materials, but the information there can easily be transferred to instructional design. While researching, I found a website with 5 tips that I thought fit in perfectly. They are: number 1, use both colors and symbols. Number 2, keep it minimal. Number 3, use patterns and textures to show contrast. Number 4, be careful with contrasting colors and hues. And number 5, avoid bad color combinations. So for the first tip, use both colors and symbols. By using both colors and symbols, users will be able to follow along with greater ease. Imagine having to take an online test where only colors were used to show what to fill out. For example, if it read, "Required fields are indicated in blue," a colorblind learner may not know what fields are required. Using things like an arrow pointing to a text box or a circle surrounding the area that needs to have text inputted can all act as good visual clues for people who cannot see the color directly. Here's another example where there are 2 sets of buttons. One of them has an instruction that says click the green button, and the other one states click the submit button. There's no reason that the buttons can't be colored, but the instructions should be made clear. Here's a fun little fact. Did you know that Facebook's logo and notorious blue color scheme was specifically chosen because Mark Zuckerberg is red-green colorblind and he sees blue the best? Believe it or not, Zuckerberg has done a lot to make sure that Facebook is user-friendly for people with color blindness. Another important tip: keep it minimal. This may be a difficult task for some of us as we want to make things appear shiny and well polished. The saying, sometimes less is more, really is true. When it comes to colors, you don't want people to feel overwhelmed. You want them to focus in on the content and not focus so much on what is around it. It made me think of my primary classroom. Each year, I like to start it with a minimum of things on the wall and build it up throughout the school year. Anything that's added needs to have value. I do my best to make sure that there's some color, but it does not need to look like Rainbow Bright came in and threw up all over the walls. Not only do I find it visually unappealing, it's also very distracting for the small learners in my room. Dr. Rose's comment in our textbook about being able to convert everything to a monochromatic format should be something that we consider as we design materials in our course and beyond. If you can take the color away, the content should still be there. It's ultimately the content that the learner needs to focus in on. Tip number 3, it's very important too. Use patterns and textures to show contrast. In our slideshows and other instances where we present data in a graphic format, we're often prone to use color to differentiate between the items. Sometimes we may even choose to use various shades of the same color, and in doing so we could alienate an entire group of individuals who cannot see colors clearly. Take a look at these bar graphs here, and you can see the use of the patterns and the textures clearly make it easier for the reader to look at. Also, there's another example here from the London Tube schedule that shows how patterns and textures make it effective, and that not everyone would be able to distinguish between the various colors. Having traveled around the world and on various public transit systems, I can tell you that there are 2 things that help me immensely: the use of the English alphabet and being able to read the visual, follow along, and count the stops. Use a variety of contrasting colors and hues. Instead of relying on black and white as your only contrasting colors, try to use a range of clearly contrasting colors and hues in your design. You'd be surprised how they can help to bring your final product to life. But again, just be careful. The final tip that was presented is to avoid bad color combinations. It's important for us to think about the combinations of colors that we're using, as well as how the colors contrast with one another. Ultimately, everything needs to be as clear as possible for all learners. The website where I found the tips suggested avoiding the following color combinations: green and red, green and brown, blue and purple, green and blue, light green and yellow, blue and gray, green and black. It may seem a little difficult right now, but over time you'll become very comfortable in knowing what color combinations work best. Hopefully my presentation's given you a few things to think about when it comes to designing instructional materials that are accessible for learners with color blindness. I think in general it's a good habit to produce materials that take the larger audience in mind, and if it means spending a few more minutes proofing and checking things out, it's worth it. So I have a few questions for you now, and if you can think of any questions that you'd like to ask me, please feel free to do so in the D2L. Finally, please click on any of the links that I've provided in the post, and the links should lead you to websites that will help you discover a lot more about color blindness and how it impacts instructional design. Thanks again, and happy learning.